we are open to it. Blizzard just came out with an interview a few days back talking extensively about a new Warcraft movie potentially happening soon. They seem quite optimistic about expanding the Warcraft franchise to a new audience, but they got quite a lot of requirements on how they want it done. Warcraft is obviously on the rise with recent news on 7+ million active subs, 3 expansions announced, a bunch of new books, and now these news as well. They're looking at similar IPs that have adapted quite successfully to different mediums, and they're exploring the options they have. So what is the likelihood of a new Warcraft movie or an animated series happening in the very near future, and what are Blizzard's plans? Did you know you can play WoW on your phone? You can check in on your characters, you can play the game, you can even do minor things you don't really want to do on the PC with this video sponsor, Awesome, allowing you to control your PC with your phone completely free, available for Windows, iOS, and Android. Awesome is incredibly easy to use. Check out my link in the description, download the PC and the phone version, and just connect it. The free version itself is amazing as you can control your desktop, transfer files, but the real deal is the game version. It has custom keyboards for various games other than just WoW, and you can enjoy AFK gaming at any time, anywhere with game sound. Make sure to use my code Doron to get 7 days completely free, only for the first 200 people. They also got a smart plug to turn off your PC at any time, as well as hot sales with up to 40% off on Pro and Game versions. Check out Awesome. So, it's really no secret that the Warcraft movie wasn't really that good. I mean, it wasn't terrible, it wasn't bad, it's just kinda there. I mean, overall it got 6.7 out of 10, which is decent, of course, but the movie was actually earnings-wise quite a disaster until the Chinese market saved it, and then everyone just kinda noped out of this entire story. I mean, the movie itself, while doing pretty decently with the game audience, just didn't really vibe with the mainstream, which for movies this size and a budget this big is essentially a prerequisite, and this is rightfully so, as anything, the entire setting of the orcs versus humans, the Dark Portal and everything is a little bit too much for someone to digest in like 2 hours that had no content with Warcraft whatsoever at any point in time. It's crazy to think that this movie was released 8 years ago, but those of you that have followed the actual development and the aftermath, you might remember that for the next year or two there was quite a lot of noise about Warcraft 2 actually happening. It seemed likely, and then they just kinda went silent and not really much occurred after that. We got a few insider bits of information, some going as far as Chris Metzen about them kinda considering something, then there were some fake leaks, but overall it has always been in the realm of rumors, like half-confirmed rumors that we could be getting Warcraft 2. However, just a few days ago we got an actual official interview for IGN with the actual Warcraft franchise director, where they had extensively talked about a sequel to the Warcraft movie, and overall the news are actually very optimistic. The entire talk is about wanting to expand the Warcraft franchise to a bigger audience, but also to not go too crazy into the mainstream where they can no longer focus on the core World of Warcraft audience. All this info is from the Game Developer Conference that happened back in March, which is the exact same conference where they showed us the subscriber graphs, which could be over 7 million active players, as well as them sort of admitting that Shadowlands was a disaster, and they were asked if a new Warcraft movie will be happening with that exact same conference. To really summarize the entire thing, they said they're open to it and are very interested, but they got quite a few requirements as well as a lot of worries for something like this to actually happen, so they're kinda weighing in the options that they have. The biggest thing they talked about is they don't want to get into it as Blizzard, and instead they want to find a partner. They realize that almost every major IP right now is doing multimedia and doing everything from an animated series to a mobile game. However, they don't want Blizzard themselves to become filmmakers. I mean, this in itself is really not news. I mean, Blizzard never actually made the first movie. They only went as far as making the cinematics, the animated promotional materials for the expansions, which were all pretty good, but the Warcraft movie itself was made by a third party in collaboration with Blizzard, and they had pretty open hands to alter the original story, which is why the movie wasn't really considered canon to the game lore. It is kind of an alternate universe of sorts. The good news, though, is that Warcraft as a franchise seems to actually have a pretty bright future, despite the craziness that has been going on the past few years, especially for the lore. This is evident with the subscriber graphs they show, this is evident with the new lore books they just announced, this is evident with the fact that they literally announced 3 expansions in advance, which never happened, and also with the fact that they're experimenting experimenting with new game modes such as Thunderstorm, so they really do have things in store, and this really might actually be the right environment for a new Warcraft movie to happen. In the interview itself, they stated a few requirements on how they want it done. They want to find a partner that can aesthetically hit the bar, that will match the entire Warcraft team. They want someone that has a proficiency in the adaptation of the game genre to the movie medium, which is quite a new industry, and only something that very recently started actually getting good. I mean, just a decade or two ago, this was really a complete meme. This is them sort of admitting that the original partner wasn't maybe the right choice. As you might remember, they partnered with like one of the biggest movie studios ever, and they don't think someone like this could adapt Warcraft that well. The franchise director admitted that this list of partners is very small, and it will be difficult to find the right partner, but if they do, it will be happening. Because of these very specific requirements and the previous failures, I don't think we will ever get Warcraft 2 as a movie, but instead they may be leaning more into an animated series or like a TV show, which realistically I think could be a lot better, and I think something like this would just naturally align with the Warcraft lore as a whole. Before we get into what could be coming very soon, let's look at really what was the problem with the Warcraft movie. You might remember that Blizzard has wanted to make a Warcraft movie pretty much since Classic, and they have been constantly delaying it. It started in 2006 and 2009, and they were having these deals that ended up going nowhere, and then they got into really like concrete production around Warlords of Draenor, which as an expansion didn't really do that well, but it's pretty much the exact same setting that was used for the Warcraft movie, the orcs versus humans. It's completely understandable why they did this. I mean, this is the origin of the entire Warcraft series, but I really don't think this is a good setting for a movie if you want to introduce Warcraft to someone new. First of all, Warcraft never really started as a lore-heavy series. The advanced storytelling only really started in Warcraft 2, realistically in Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft, and the orcs versus humans is not really what turned Warcraft into a major success. I mean, sure, it was decently popular as an RTS, but really it was post-Warcraft 3 that turned the entire franchise mainstream and turned Blizzard into a gigantic company that it is up to this day. So, just from the start, I don't think the first war is a good setting for a movie. I know they kinda set it up sort of as a trilogy, but it was really just too much for the mainstream. I mean, you got green, brown orcs, you got Draenor, you got humans, Azeroth, magic, Medivh, you got Fel magic, you got the Burning Legion that no one knows what it is, that is kind of pulling the strings. Seeing how big the orcs are and the wolves, everything has to be CGI, and despite the fact that the guy that directed the movie was an actual Warcraft fan and they had pretty good actors, the movie ended up being a pretty generic sci-fi for someone that is not familiar with any of the storylines. I know this is a pretty popular opinion, but really, if they wanted to do it right, the artist storyline would have been the best way to go. I know the undead can definitely be a bit cheesy, but the fallen hero trope is incredibly popular and generally does well, and it is localized enough where you only really got the Kingdom of Lordaeron that is the main focus of the entire movie. So really, the focus is on the promising young prince defending his homeland and falling to darkness, and from the crazy sci-fi monsters you only really got the undead. It would be very much akin to like a Game of Thrones type movie, a pretty simple localized storyline but with a ton of lore in the background that doesn't bombard you with crazy names and a crazy amount of information all at once. So just that in itself would introduce the franchise much better to the mainstream, as people are going to relate more to a human kingdom as opposed to gigantic CGI orcs that are invading but are also sort of the victims and sort of the good guys at the same time. With the advancement of AI, we got some really crazy like scenes where an Artist Scourge movie was created like a few months back. You can check that out on YouTube, but it actually looks incredibly promising. I mean, just in the AI bare bones type way, so definitely if they actually do something like this, it could be good. Overall though, a TV show as a medium would honestly work a lot better. I mean, Warcraft is a very specific universe as opposed to a lot of other fantasy, especially fantasy that is used for movies. It is game lore, and because it is video game lore, it requires constant content, promotional materials, and because of that, it has a ton of lore, an insane amount of characters. I mean, it is so hard to keep up. They literally have lore historians. They had 5 until recently that they hired just to remind the story team on what characters actually exist in the lore. more so, it is very hard to convey the storyline this big into a movie. Therefore, having like an 8 or 10 part series based on the artist novel, for example, I think could work out quite well. However, as I had previously stated, I think an animated series might even actually be the best way to go forward. You might remember the pre-BlizzCon rumors, there was some talks of them planning an animated series. First of all, I think budget-wise, this would be a lot smaller risk. They don't need to go into the crazy hundreds of millions of dollars business. Second, you might remember that Blizzard has actually made quite a lot of animated videos in the past to promote expansions. We even got a few videos for Dragonflight itself, which was very well received. Sure, they were more kind of glorified animated comics, which was for promotional expansion material, but they were pretty good and they could convey a complex storyline quite well to an audience that might not even be too familiar with the storyline itself. However, they could just start out with an animated series, doesn't even need to be that crazy, which could be a probe into how it would perform with an audience that is not actually playing the game. If they actually focus this animated series on a storyline that could resonate quite well, it would actually mean a lot for the game series as well, as it would draw in new players to the game itself. Overall though, I mean, these news seem great. I mean, we got 3 expansions announced, new short stories, new books, experimenting on game modes, patches happening every few months, Blizzard admitting that some past storylines were bad, and also considering a new movie for the franchise. We could really be in for some really good times for World of Warcraft. Thank you for watching. Check out what is out there doing at Caesar Discovery by clicking on the screen, and check out my video on HK Colonies in Spain by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.